This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by NYSE Governance Services Corporate Board Member, along with Governance Knowledge Partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter, the chairman of the NYSE Governance Services Corporate Board Member, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this week's show. We're going to be taking a look this week at a topic that is certainly sensitive to every board, and that is the topic of understanding the board's cyber opportunities and the risks that are associated with that. We got a great expert today to join us to deal with this topic. And let me introduce Jeffry Powell, who's the Executive Vice President of Diligent. And those of you that are familiar with secure board portals, Diligent is the provider of board books, which is one of the leaders in the business. And Jeffry, welcome.
Thanks, TK. It's great to be here.
Well, I don't need to tell you, since this is your business, how secure board portals have grown. On this show, we're famous of saying it's not if somebody will have a board portal, but when somebody will have a board portal. So we encourage everybody to sort of understand that this is where the world's going. So that would be categorized as one of the opportunities, of what's happened. So talk to us a little bit about the acceptance and how the topic of board portals has grown in the boardroom.
Sure. It's interesting because in recent years there really has been a rapid acceleration in how many companies are using secure board portals to compile and distribute information to their boards. This, of course, replaces the traditional paper-based way of distributing materials, which is what all companies did at some point in time, binding up big books, shipping them out to their users. And when we first introduced the board portal onto the market, Diligent really did pioneer that process. It was funny because the first aspect of security that had to be addressed was people making the transition from paper to an electronic way of distributing materials. And it's funny to think about because that's not that long ago. And we would have conversations with a general counsel or a corporate secretary where they would say something like, well, we've always FedExed our materials out, and I'm not really comfortable putting them online. And so I would ask them a couple of questions. I would say, well, did you ever have any of those packages not show up, or have somebody not be where they said they were going to be and it's sitting on their doorstep? Or did you ever have a board member leave a book in a hotel or in a taxi cab? And they would never say anything. They would just get real quiet. But I could see the wheels turning in their head. And that was one of those moments where it wasn't intuitively obvious that actually moving to a secure board portal was and is a more secure way of distributing your materials. You've actually got a tighter control on them. Nobody's going to leave them accidentally any place. There's no chance that anybody's going to access them except the people that you give the ability to access them. So once companies, people, boards started making these changes, then they're started addressing other issues. Well, where is the data stored? We were providing hosted services before some hipster thought up the phrase in the cloud. And it was making people understand that when you're using a secure board portal, it's not that your materials are just stored out there somewhere in the cloud. It's a hosted facility, a private cloud, something that's still very tightly controlled. And then people started addressing other issues. Well, do I want to let people print these materials? Can I keep them from printing? Sure. Just the way you can choose who can access the materials, you can choose what they can do with those materials. That also addresses annotations. If somebody's used to getting a paper book, they may be used to writing writing notes or highlighting text on those pages. Well, can you still do that with the secure board portal? Yes, of course you can, but you've also got the ability to purge these notes. So within the world of board portals, there's been this evolution of how people think about security, which is really tied to functionality. And of course, our system was always designed to address these areas. But now what's happened is we've started moving into other areas of security. So people can be comfortable with the hosted solution, can be comfortable with the electronic distribution of materials, but now they have to address other issues, which is that I've got a board and my board members want to access it from 3 or 4 different types of devices. How do I handle that? So information security, individual access of materials now has moved beyond just being able to utilize one secure channel for how you distribute materials. You also have to look at the bigger picture in how your users want to and are going to access those materials.
Well, Board Portal is a great example of opportunities, cyber opportunities. And it's funny when you find somebody that was wary on the front end and now is an advocate. They're like a reformed smoker. They want to preach to everyone,
Yes.
even though they were one of the ones in the front end that had some suspicion. But it really has presented a very logical solution to dealing with all that stuff. So that's one of the opportunities. That's not the thing that's keeping people up at night. The thing that's keeping people up at night is the risk. Okay, so let's first talk about, some key steps that boards should be doing to make sure that they have their arms around in the company their responsibility to oversee data security as one of the risks.
It's something that the board has to be involved with from the beginning. And the way that cybersecurity is addressed at a company has to start from the top and go down through every member of the organization. And of course, it's a very serious topic, and I don't mean to sound humorous, but being a sales guy, I of course like to tell stories. And one of the ways in which I think about security is I'm from Boston, which is a notoriously bad driving city. And I will never forget when I was in high school, my driving instructor telling me, if you're going to learn to drive in this city, you have to drive around with the attitude that there's people out there who are trying to run into you. And of course, that's a tale of the terrible Boston drivers. But the reason that I think about it as it applies to security is that you have to understand that no matter how benign or protected you think your business might be, you have to understand that there are people out there who are trying to compromise it. Whether or not it's a denial of service or trying to steal information or compromise information, you have to understand that this is happening. This is happening every single day. Maybe you can't imagine why someone would want to do it, or that there's actually criminal elements out there that want to do it, but there are, whether or not it's individuals or state-sponsored organizations. Every business, everyone who's online, everybody who has some type of particularly web-facing application, there are people out there trying to compromise your business. So you have to understand that. So that's the risk that you're facing. So when a company starts to look at security issues, cybersecurity, they have to have that as the basic, that we are under attack on a daily basis. Everyone in the company has to be aware of it, their individual responsibility to security, and the board has to establish that policy from the top. It has to be addressed across every aspect of the organization so that each individual employee understands what their role is as relates to security and what their individual responsibilities are.
I know it's a big responsibility that keeps directors up at night, that's for sure. Probably the thing that is most concerning is this is a risk or a set of risks that you don't know what you don't know, okay?
Right.
And you've seen examples of some very well-respected firms being targeted. Not meant to be a pun. Target was one of those, but that's one of the biggest concerns. This is an area that not only do directors, a lot of directors, due to the demographics, are not technology savvy, but now you have a risk that's in an area that you don't even know how to get your arms around. So that's got to be daunting.
It is daunting, and it's a good point talking about attacks at large retailers, which people can understand why someone would want to do that. But you also have to address that even if you're not taking people's credit card information or something, you have confidential information, whether or not it has to do with business development or product development or mergers or whatever it is. This information that your highest level people at a company, the most secure materials, this is something that people are interested in addressing. And I think that what's important for board members, for executives to understand is they don't have to be experts on how those attacks work or who the people are, but they do have to understand that they have to be expert in establishing the policies and procedures at their company. Every day, new forms of attack are being thought up. Next year there's going to be something totally different than there is right now or there was a year ago. Typical board member can't possibly be expected to keep on top of all of that stuff. I mean, even as somebody who deals in the world of security every day, there's certainly many people at our company more involved in IT, more involved in risk management, who are much more knowledgeable than I am, and it's a daily process for them to keep up with information. Yes, you're not going to know every possible thing, you're not going to understand the details of every possible thing, but to allay, that fear, you have to understand that, you need to be involved in establishing how your company is going to address security issues and how it's going to deal with the threat of cybersecurity.
So we have the advantage of having you in studio, and let me ask you, you're somebody that thinks about this all the time. So as you sort of look out into the future, what's your biggest fear of sort of how fast all this digital, both opportunity and risk, has been generated? What's your biggest fear when you look out relative to that risk?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I'm going to say that you might think that my biggest fear is this area of what the unknown is. These things that are out there, whether or not, my goodness, have we already been breached? Has our data already been compromised? I mean, I know that people lose sleep over that, but that's not my biggest fear. My biggest fear is people not understanding the importance of this. Not understanding at the top level of a company, all the way through the company, that every single person has a responsibility to this. When we were talking about people may have some certain understanding of, people may be targeting you in certain ways through email, that everybody knows to be careful about that. But it's actually something, when you're doing business, you have to be aware of the device you're using, the network you're using, the materials that you're accessing. And you have to understand that those IT guys, the security people at your company who are establishing policies and procedures for which devices you can use, how you can use them, setting up encrypted email, setting up virtual networks, setting up partitions on your devices. These may seem at times like things are a hindrance to you doing your work. That's not the case at all. They're addressing security. And my biggest fear is that people don't always understand, what is at stake here, and that they need to be aware of security. It's not the type of thing where I want people lying awake at night worrying about it. I want them to understand that a well-run, a well-managed company is going to address this at the highest level, put together policies and procedures, a plan of action that's going to go through every employee at the company, that every employee at the company is responsible for understanding that, understanding that anyone is a potential point for a breach in that security, that they have to follow the policies and procedures, and that they have to be aware of what are the appropriate and effective ways of reviewing materials and acting as an employee who's aware of security.
Well, let me add one little quick piece of advice. Make sure that you as a company also have a crisis plan, so that
of course,
if it happens to you, there isn't this idea of a fire drill. There's the concept, okay, we implement our crisis plan and deal with that. You can tell the companies that have pre-thought that and the ones that haven't. So that's an important piece of advice as well. So,
absolutely.
So Jeffrey, thanks for joining us today, and that will conclude this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week where we take a look at another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. And we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by NYSE Governance Services Corporate Board Member, along with Governance Knowledge Partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.